Imagine this. You've worked hard to build your dream barn, a peaceful retreat tucked away on your property. You've got your plans, your space, and your privacy, until one day, the last person you'd ever expect shows up at your doorstep. Enter the HOA Karen, and she's not here with a complaint, but with a demand that would change everything. Without asking, she moves her daughter's wedding, with 100 guests, right into your barn. Yeah, you heard that right. A full-on wedding in my barn, no commission, no notice, just a bold takeover. But the plot thickens. This wasn't just any wedding. This was an HOA Karen wedding, and things quickly spiraled out of control. What did I do? Well, let's just say I have a secret weapon that doesn't take kindly to intruders. Meet my cane Corsos. They may look calm, but trust me, they're not happy when things go wrong. As the wedding chaos erupted, I knew I had to make a move, but what happened next? Did I stop the wedding, or did it get even more out of hand? You won't believe what happens when these two forces collide. Stay tuned to find out what went down and what I did next. Now, let me give you some context here. This wasn't just any random Karen. She was the type who always had something to say about everyone else's property, about every little thing that wasn't up to code. She'd show up to HOA meetings with her clipboard like she was on a mission to ruin everyone's day. Honestly, I had dealt with her complaints before, about the way I landscaped, the color of my fence, even the angle of my driveway. But never in a million years did I expect her to pull something like this. That day, I had just finished up some work on the barn, getting it ready for the season. It's not just any barn either. It's got some serious charm. The kind of charm that makes you think, yeah, this would be the perfect spot for a family gathering. The last thing I wanted was a massive wedding ruining the place I worked so hard on. I'm not one to back down easily, but when I saw Karen walking up to my door, all I could think was, here we go again. She had her daughter and her wedding planner in tow, as if they owned the place. They had a full-on wedding set up, and they were already planning on bringing in all these guests, chairs, flowers, the works. No phone call, no heads up, just a demand. But then, the moment I realized this wasn't going to be just a simple disagreement, I knew I had to take action. The question was, how far would I go to get my barn back? And what would my cane Corsos think about all of this? I stood there, watching as Karen's daughter and her wedding planner tried to ignore me while setting up their decorations. The audacity of it all hit me like a ton of bricks. They just assumed they could take over my space without even asking. The barn, my barn, was supposed to be for my family and close friends, not a random wedding. I started walking toward them, trying to keep my cool, but my mind was racing. What would happen next? How far would this Karen go to make sure her daughter's perfect day happened in my barn? Karen, of course, spotted me first. She flashed that smug, condescending smile of hers and waved me over. "Oh, don't worry," she said. "We'll be out of your hair soon. We just needed the space for the wedding. It's all been arranged. You can just stay inside while we handle everything." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked her, "Arranged by who?" "You didn't ask me for permission." But Karen just laughed it off, dismissing me like I was nothing. Meanwhile, I could feel my cane Corsos, Roman and Maximus, stirring inside the house. I knew they had heard the commotion, and I had a sinking feeling that they weren't going to sit this one out. They were trained to protect, and it didn't take much to trigger them when things felt off. I glanced at the barn, then back at Karen's smug face. She had no idea what she was about to walk into. As I turned to go back inside and calm the dogs, I caught a glimpse of the wedding guests starting to arrive. The parking lot, which had been empty just an hour ago, was now filling up with cars. It was happening, and I was getting more angry by the minute. I wanted to confront Karen right there, but I knew that would only make things worse. The thought of her and her guests treating my property like it was theirs was unbearable. I walked into the house and into the backyard, where Roman and Maximus were waiting. They immediately knew something was wrong. They stood tall, their eyes locked on me, sensing my frustration. "Stay inside," I whispered, but I could already feel the tension building between us all. The barn wasn't just a building, it was something that represented my hard work, my peace, and my sanctuary. And now it was under threat. I took a deep breath, thinking through my options. I could call the police, but that might take too long. And Karen, she wasn't someone who responded well to authority, not unless it was on her terms. What I really needed was leverage. I needed to figure out how to take control of the situation without making things worse. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized the dogs might be the key. They didn't just guard the house, they guarded everything I cared about. And if Karen thought she could waltz in and do whatever she wanted, she was about to learn just how serious I was. With the tension rising, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The sound of wedding music started to filter through the air, a faint melody drifting from the speakers Karen's team had set up near the barn. My blood was boiling. I tried to shake it off, but the more I thought about what was happening, the angrier I got. This wasn't just about a wedding anymore. It was about respect, boundaries, and my right to control what happened on my own property. I looked out the window, seeing the guests milling around, laughing, chatting, completely oblivious to the tension building behind the scenes. The whole scene felt surreal. My barn, my sanctuary, now looked like a party venue for strangers. And Karen, she was smiling, talking to the guests as if everything was perfectly normal, like she had every right to be there. Roman and Maximus were still inside, their instincts on high alert. I couldn't keep them locked up much longer. They needed to be outside. I couldn't shake the feeling that once they were out, everything would change. I made up my mind. I couldn't just stand there and watch this happen. If I didn't act now, Karen would walk all over me, just like she always did. I grabbed the leashes, headed toward the back door, and opened it. The dogs immediately perked up, sensing that something was coming. Their ears stood tall, their bodies tense with anticipation. They knew, just like I did, that something had to give. I let them out, and they charged toward the barn, their heavy paws hitting the ground with each powerful step. It felt like time slowed down. In the distance, Karen was still chatting away, totally unaware of what was happening behind her. The dogs were getting closer, and I could see her finally glance over in our direction, her eyes widening as she took in the sight of two massive cane Corsos heading straight for her wedding. "Roman, Maximus, stay," I called, but the dogs were already in full protection mode, their instincts taking over. I could see the panic in Karen's face as she realized what was coming. Guests were starting to scatter, the conversations dying down as the dogs charged closer. Some of them tried to stand their ground, but I knew they didn't stand a chance against the sheer force of Roman and Maximus. The wedding planner, frantic now, shouted at the guests to back away, but it was too late. I stood there, frozen for a moment, my heart racing. I had no idea what would happen next. Would the dogs stop? Would the guests leave in a panic? Would Karen finally back down? Or had I just unleashed chaos that I couldn't control? Everything was spiraling, and I had no way of predicting how far this would go. Just as Roman and Maximus were about to close the distance between them and Karen's wedding, something unexpected happened. A loud, high-pitched voice cut through the air, making everyone freeze. "Stop. Don't you dare let those dogs near my guests." I turned my head in shock, only to see a new figure storming toward us from behind the crowd, a man in a suit, looking far too important to be here. It was Karen's husband. I hadn't seen him around much before, but suddenly he was standing in front of me, blocking my path, hands raised in protest. "Who do you think you are?" he snapped, his eyes blazing with anger. "This is my daughter's special day. You think you can just bring your dogs and ruin everything?" I couldn't believe it. Now both of them, Karen and her husband, were standing between me and the dogs, acting like they had any right to dictate what happened on my property. Roman and Maximus, sensing their owner's tension, hesitated for a moment, but that didn't stop the crowd from starting to panic. People were scrambling to find shelter, some ducking behind cars or retreating to the barn for safety. The tension in the air was palpable, and I knew I was running out of time to make a choice. Karen's husband was now shouting at me, demanding that I get my dogs under control or face the consequences. But just as I opened my mouth to respond, something even crazier happened. The wedding planner, frantic and on edge, had backed into one of the decorative tables. In a split second, she knocked over a huge vase of flowers, sending it crashing to the ground with a loud bang. The dogs, reacting to the noise, went into full protective mode. Maximus barked loudly, and Roman growled, his stance low and menacing. I knew I had to step in before things went from bad to worse. But it was too late. Karen's husband turned to see the chaos unfolding, his face twisting into a mask of fury. "You've made a huge mistake," he hissed, his voice dripping with venom. "This will cost you." And then, before I could even take a breath, something I wasn't expecting happened. Karen's husband pulled out a phone and called someone, his words sharp and commanding. I heard him mutter, "Get the lawyer on the line, now. We'll make sure this man regrets ever standing up to us." A cold shiver ran down my spine. Now it wasn't just about a wedding or a few angry guests. This was becoming something much bigger, something more dangerous. What had I just walked into? And how far were they willing to go to get what they wanted? The stakes had just skyrocketed, and I wasn't sure I could get out of this one unscathed. The moment Karen's husband made that call, I knew things were spiraling out of control. I had no idea what kind of legal threats they were about to unleash, but one thing was clear: they weren't going to back down. The crowd was still scattering, and my cane Corsos were clearly getting agitated, sensing the rising tension. Roman and Maximus had stopped at the edge of the crowd, but they were growling low in their throats, ready to charge at any sign of danger. I was standing there, trying to calm them, but the weight of what was happening hit me hard. This wasn't just a disagreement over a wedding. It was a full-on showdown between me and a powerful family who clearly had the resources to make my life miserable. Before I could figure out my next move, I heard the unmistakable sound of sirens. The last thing I wanted was for the police to show up, but I couldn't ignore the fact that this was getting way out of hand. I turned just in time to see a squad car pulling up to the driveway, and Karen's husband immediately started talking to the officers, his voice filled with anger. I knew what was coming. He was painting the picture of me as the crazy neighbor with the out-of-control dogs, and I couldn't let that stand. But just as the officer approached me, asking me what had happened, a surprising turn of events took place. One of the wedding guests, a woman who had been hiding behind the barn, stepped forward. She was holding her phone, her expression serious. "Officer," she said, looking directly at the policeman, "I think you should hear this." The officer turned, confused, but the woman pressed play on her phone, and then my jaw dropped. It was a recording of Karen and her husband talking about how they planned to take over my barn for the wedding, even though they knew I hadn't agreed to it. It wasn't just a casual decision. It was a deliberate attempt to pressure me into letting them have it. The woman had recorded their entire conversation earlier that day when they had spoken openly about their plans. She had overheard them talking in the parking lot when they arrived. The officer's expression changed instantly. He looked at Karen's husband and then at me, his eyes narrowing. "Is this true?" he asked, his tone now stern. Karen's husband faltered for a second, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. He had clearly underestimated the situation. With the evidence in hand, it was clear that Karen and her husband had crossed a line. The officer turned to Karen, who was still standing with her mouth open, trying to come up with some excuse. "Ma'am, I'm afraid you've made a serious mistake here. You can't just take someone's property like this, especially when they haven't consented." The tension in the air seemed to evaporate as Karen's facade crumbled. The guests who had been hiding in the barn started coming out, and some of them were actually cheering, relieved that the nightmare was over. Karen and her husband were now standing there, defeated. The officer called for backup, and they would be facing charges for trespassing and, most likely, harassment. Just when I thought it was final,